A cowboy wept over his dying horse, the last precious memory of his lost wife. He was helpless against the serpent's venom, until a mysterious Apache woman emerged from the wilderness with a shocking challenge that would force him to choose between his prejudice and a final, desperate hope. For Liam O'Connell, his horse was not just an animal. He was a conversation with the past, a living, breathing testament to a love that had been stolen from him too soon. The stallion, a magnificent creature named Spirit, with a coat the color of polished mahogany and a fiercely intelligent eye, was the last gift from his wife, Elena. She had given him the young colt just a month before the fever had swept through their small valley, taking her with it and leaving Liam in a world of echoing silence. For 3 years, that silence had been his only companion. His grief a vast, empty prairie, he wandered alone. But he was never truly alone. He had Spirit. He had poured all of his unspoken sorrow, all of his cherished memories of Elena, into the raising of this horse. They were more than master and animal. They were partners, two solitary souls who understood each other without the need for words. Spirit seemed to know his moods, nudging him gently when the grief was heavy, his powerful gallop, a shared expression of freedom on days when the sun felt a little warmer. The horse was the last, beautiful chapter in a love story that had ended too soon, and Liam guarded him with a fierce, protective love that was the only anchor in his adrift life. They were riding the high country, checking the northern boundary of his ranch, a place of stunning, dangerous beauty. The air was crisp, the sky a piercing blue, and the tall grass swayed in the gentle breeze. It was a perfect day, a day so peaceful it felt like a betrayal of the constant ache in Liam's heart. Spirit was unusually energetic, his hooves dancing over the rocky trail, his ears pricked forward with a lively curiosity. Liam let him have his head, a rare, small smile touching his lips as he watched the powerful animal move beneath him. The attack, when it came, was a blur of violence and instinct. They were passing through a narrow, sun-dappled arroyo, a dry creek bed littered with rocks and scrub brush. Spirit, with his keen senses, detected it first. He shied violently, rearing up with a terrified snort, his powerful body trembling. Liam, an expert horseman, fought to control him, his mind trying to process the sudden, explosive fear. And then he saw it, coiled by a large, flat rock, its tail a blur of angry sound, was a massive diamondback rattlesnake, its head drawn back, ready to strike again. It had already struck. On Spirit's powerful front leg, just above the fetlock, were two small, almost insignificant puncture wounds, a tiny gateway through which a lethal dose of venom was now coursing. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Liam. He leaped from the saddle, his rifle in his hand, and ended the serpent's life with a single, furious shot. But the damage was done. The enemy was no longer the snake on the ground. It was the poison, an invisible fire, now racing through his best friend's veins. He acted on instinct, his mind a whirlwind of frantic, half-forgotten frontier remedies. He tied his own neckerchief tightly above the wound, a desperate attempt to slow the venom spread. Using his hunting knife, he made a small, clumsy cut over the bite, trying to draw out the poison. But the blood that welled up was already dark and sluggish. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was failing. Within the hour, the poison's devastating work was clear. Spirit's leg had swollen to a grotesque size, the skin stretched tight and hot to the touch. The proud stallion was now on the ground, his body trembling with violent shudders, his breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Liam knelt beside him, his own heart breaking with every pained groan that escaped the horse's lips. He was helpless. He was a man of the land, but against this enemy, his knowledge was useless. He was miles from any town, hours from any help that might have made a difference. He looked into the horse's eyes, and he saw not just the dull glaze of pain, but a deep, trusting confusion. Spirit did not understand why his master, the man who had always protected him, could not make the pain stop. The sight shattered the last of Liam's stoic control. He, a man who had not cried since the day he buried his wife, lowered his head onto his horse's heaving flank and wept. Raw, ragged, helpless sobs of a man watching the last piece of his heart die before his very eyes. The venom was not just killing his horse. It was killing the last, beautiful memory of Elena. And he could do nothing to stop it. It was in the depths of his despair, a place of absolute hopelessness, that he first sensed her presence. It was not a sound, but a shift in the air, a feeling of being watched. Liam lifted his tear-streaked face, his eyes blurry with grief, and saw her. She was standing at the edge of the arroyo, a silent, motionless figure who seemed to have materialized from the very earth itself. She was a young Apache woman, her face a mask of serene, unreadable calm. Her eyes, dark and profound, were not fixed on him, but on the dying horse. This was Tala. Liam's first reaction was a jolt of primal fear and suspicion. He scrambled for his rifle, his mind, clouded by grief, reverting to the ingrained prejudices of the frontier. An Apache, a savage. Was she a scout for a war party? A scavenger drawn by the scent of death? He clutched the rifle, its familiar weight a cold comfort, and his voice was a low, ragged growl. "Get back. This is my land. There's nothing for you here." The woman did not flinch. She did not seem to even notice the rifle pointed in her direction. Her gaze remained on the horse, her expression one of deep clinical assessment, like a doctor examining a patient. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her movements as graceful and as silent as a stalking wolf, the name her people had given her. She pointed a slender finger towards the grotesquely swollen leg of the stallion. She spoke, her voice a low, melodic contralto, laced with an accent that was both foreign and ancient. Her words were not a threat. They were a challenge, a statement of fact, so direct and so unexpected it cut through the fog of his grief. Tears will not draw the poison. Liam stared at her, stunned into silence by her audacity. She took another step closer, her dark eyes finally lifting to meet his. He saw no malice in them, no greed, only a profound, almost unnerving stillness. "My knowledge might, if you are man enough to trust it." The bargain was laid bare, a choice, stark and absolute. His world, the world of so-called civilized men, of doctors and science he couldn't reach, had failed him. It offered only a slow, agonizing death for his friend. Her world, a world of ancient knowledge, of herbs and rituals he neither understood nor trusted, was offering a single, fragile sliver of hope. But the price of that hope was his pride. The price was his prejudice. The price was trust. A war raged within Liam's soul. Every story he had ever heard, every campfire tale, every warning from the army, screamed at him that this was a trick. Indian medicine was a savage superstition, a collection of pagan chants and useless weeds. To trust her would be an act of utter foolishness, an abandonment of reason. He would be handing over his last, precious connection to his wife to the whims of a savage. The thought was a physical revulsion, a betrayal of everything he was. But then he looked down at Spirit. He felt the violent tremors that shook the horse's body. He saw the foam frothing at his lips, heard the shallow, ragged breaths that were growing weaker with every passing moment. The horse was dying. His world, the world of reason and logic, was letting him die. His choices were no longer between sense and superstition. They were between a certain death and a desperate, impossible chance. He looked back at the Apache woman. She had not moved. She simply stood there, waiting, her calm, unwavering gaze a silent challenge to his own turmoil. She was not pleading. She was offering. It was his choice to accept or to refuse. The pride of his race, the skepticism of his culture, the deep-seated fear of the unknown, he could cling to all of it. Or he could let it all go for the love of his horse. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound of utter and complete surrender. The fight was over. Desperation had won. He lowered the rifle, placing it on the ground, a symbolic act of disarmament. He looked at Tala, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "Help him, please." Tala gave a single, slow nod. She had not won a convert. She had simply found a man whose love for his animal was stronger than his fear of her. The bargain was struck. The slow, arduous process of healing, not just of the horse, but of the man, was about to begin. With Liam's reluctant consent, Tala transformed. The quiet, watchful woman became a figure of immense, focused power. She moved with a swift, practiced efficiency, her every action imbued with a sense of ancient, sacred purpose. She opened a small leather pouch at her belt, revealing not a chaotic collection of herbs, but a meticulously organized array of dried roots, powdered minerals, and strange, dark pastes. Her knowledge was not a guess. It was a science, a library of the earth's secrets passed down through generations. Liam watched, a silent, skeptical observer. He expected chance and rattles, a performance of superstition. What he saw instead was a methodical, almost clinical process. Tala first took a sharp, obsidian knife, and with a surgeon's precision, reopened the small cuts he had made, her movements far more confident and effective than his own clumsy attempts. She then applied a dark, thick poultice to the wound, a mixture that smelled of pine sap, charcoal, and something else, something earthy and wild. She then began to work on the horse's whole system. She ground a pale, chalky root into a fine powder and mixed it with water from her own canteen, forcing the bitter liquid down Spirit's throat. She spoke to the horse the entire time, not in English, but in the soft, flowing cadences of her own Apache tongue. Her words were not a plea, but a conversation, a negotiation with the horse's spirit, asking it to fight, to hold on, to not surrender to the poison that was trying to claim it. Liam, a man of a world that saw animals as property, as tools, was mesmerized. She was not treating an animal. She was treating a person, a being with a spirit, a will. She moved around the suffering stallion with a fearless compassion, her hands always gentle, her voice a constant, reassuring presence in the horse's world of pain. He saw her place her hands on the horse's heaving chest, her eyes closing, her lips moving in a silent chant. And in that moment, he felt it. A strange, inexplicable sense of calm, a stillness that seemed to emanate from her and settle over the terrified animal. Spirit's violent shudders began to ease, his breathing, while still ragged, becoming a little deeper, a little steadier. This was the turning point, the first undeniable proof that her world held a power his did not. After applying the poultice and administering the medicine, Tala instructed Liam to build a small, intense fire. Into the flames, she cast a handful of dried, silvery leaves. A thick, pungent, and strangely sweet smoke billowed up, and she directed it so that it washed over the horse's body. She explained in her simple, direct English that the smoke would confuse the poisoned spirit, would weaken its hold. Liam, the pragmatist, the skeptic, found himself following her instructions without question, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he had ever been taught. For hours, they worked, a strange, silent team. She would point, and he would obey, his strength now in service to her knowledge. He gathered specific types of wood for the fire. He held the horse's great head steady. He fetched water. He was no longer just an observer. He was an apprentice, a willing participant in a ritual that defied all logic but offered the only hope. Sometime in the late afternoon, she finally stopped. She knelt by Spirit's swollen leg and carefully removed the dark poultice. Liam leaned in, his heart pounding, and he saw it. The change was subtle, but it was undeniable. The angry, purple swelling that had stretched the skin to its breaking point had visibly receded. The terrible heat radiating from the wound had lessened. It was not a miracle. It was a result, a tangible, physical result of her strange, wild medicine. His skepticism, the hard, stubborn wall of his prejudice, did not just crack. It shattered. It was blown to dust by the undeniable evidence before his eyes. A profound, overwhelming sense of awe washed over him. He looked at Tala, at this small, quiet woman who commanded the secrets of the earth, and saw not a savage, but a healer of immense power and wisdom. He had spent his life believing his world was the only one that held the truth. In a single, humbling afternoon, he had been proven utterly, completely wrong. What do we do now? The word "we" hung in the air between them. He was no longer a bystander, He was her partner. The healing of the horse was now their shared mission. Tu yet veri. Book turn hoai ne de sup do hoanton. Te vau do la, suton trong va, mo quan he doi tak vo chermno. Jo la luk di sohon vau tri tim katala, tiet lo plot twist. Lidu kan yan. Be thamdong sao suk man va keen the kuko. As dusk settled over the high country, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and soft gray, a new, quiet rhythm was established between them. The crisis was not over. Spirit was still dangerously weak, but the immediate, violent threat of the venom had been held at bay by Tala's strange medicine. They were now in a long, patient battle, a vigil for the horse's life. They worked together through the long, quiet hours of the night, a silent, efficient team. She would periodically reapply a fresh poultice, and he, without needing to be asked, would ensure the fire for the purifying smoke never went out. He brought her water and shared his meager rations of jerky and hardtack, which she accepted with a quiet, grateful nod. The immense cultural chasm that had separated them just hours before had been bridged by a shared, singular purpose. They were no longer a white man and an Apache woman. They were two healers fighting a common enemy. In the intimate quiet of the night, surrounded by the vast, sleeping wilderness, Liam's awe gave way to a deep, profound curiosity. He looked at Tala, her face illuminated by the soft firelight, her expression one of intense, unwavering focus as she checked on the horse. He saw not just a skilled healer, but a young woman, and he wondered what path had led her to this solitary life, to this incredible, esoteric knowledge. He finally asked, his voice a low murmur, careful not to break the fragile peace between them. He asked her how she had learned the secrets of the serpent's poison. Tala did not answer immediately. She continued her work, her hands gently stroking Spirit's neck, soothing the animal's tremors. Then, she turned to him, her dark, profound eyes holding a sadness that seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves, and she shared with him her own story of loss. This was the plot twist, the heartbreaking secret that was the source of her incredible power. She told him of her younger brother, a boy named Kale, who was just 8 years old. He was a bright, curious child, full of laughter, who loved to chase lizards among the sun-warmed rocks of their village. One day, his curiosity had led him too close to a sleeping rattler. The snake, startled, had struck him on the hand. The tribe's shaman, a wise but very old man, had been away visiting a neighboring clan. They had done what they could, using the common remedies, but the boy was small and the venom was powerful. She described, her voice a flat, emotionless whisper that was more heartbreaking than any tears. The horror of watching her little brother fade. She spoke of the helpless rage she had felt, the same impotent fury that Liam himself had felt just hours ago. When the shaman had finally returned 2 days later, it was too late. Her brother was gone. In that moment of profound, shattering grief, Tala had made a vow. She swore on her brother's spirit that she would never be helpless like that again. She had left the traditional path of an Apache woman and had become a student of the shaman, not of the great spirits, but of the earth itself. She had dedicated her life to understanding the land's secrets, its poisons, and its remedies. She learned which roots could soothe a fever, which leaves could draw out infection, and which rare, bitter herbs, when combined in just the right way, could fight the deadliest serpent's venom. Her knowledge was not just a skill, it was an armor, forged in the fires of her own personal tragedy. Her solitary life was not one of choice, but of a sacred, self-imposed duty. As her story finished, a profound, empathetic silence settled between them. Liam stared at her, his heart aching. He had looked at her and seen a mysterious, powerful Apache healer. Now, he saw a sister grieving for a lost brother. He saw a soul whose path had been irrevocably altered by a sudden, tragic loss, just as his own had been. His grief was for a wife, hers for a brother, but the shape of the hole left in their hearts was exactly the same. He finally understood the challenge in her words from that afternoon. If you were man enough to trust it. She had not been questioning his courage. She had been asking if he was man enough to look past his own world, his own grief, and see the shared humanity in hers. And he was. In the deep quiet of the wilderness, two solitary, grieving souls had finally, unexpectedly, found a reflection of their own pain in the eyes of a stranger. Tala's story, a quiet confession whispered in the darkness, had irrevocably shifted the ground beneath Liam's feet. He was no longer just a man grateful for her help. He was a man who felt a deep, profound connection to the woman who had shared the sacred geography of her own grief. They worked through the rest of the night in a new kind of silence, one not of awkwardness, but of a deep, shared understanding. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep over the eastern peaks, it brought with it a fragile sense of hope. The swelling in Spirit's leg had continued to recede, and his breathing was now deep and steady. He was still incredibly weak, unable to stand, but the violent tremors had ceased. He had survived the night. The poison's hold was broken. A wave of immense relief washed over Liam, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees again. He looked at Tala, a thank you on his lips, but the word was inadequate, a vessel too small to hold the ocean of gratitude he felt. But the wilderness is a place of brutal, unsentimental cycles. Where one predator is defeated, another is often waiting. The scent of a sick, weakened animal, a scent of an easy meal, had been carried on the night wind. Tala sensed it first. She stiffened, her head lifting, her eyes scanning the high, rocky ridges that surrounded their small camp. Her hand moved silently to the small knife at her belt. Liam, following her gaze, saw it too. Perched on a high ledge, silhouetted against the gray morning sky, was a cougar, a mountain lion. It was large and gaunt, its long body coiled like a spring, its gaze fixed intently on the helpless form of the horse below. It was not just observing, it was waiting, its hunter's patience a far greater threat than any venom. The horse, Spirit, was in no condition to flee or fight. He was a perfect target, and Tala, though a skilled healer, was armed only with a small knife. The predator on the ridge knew it had all the advantages. A cold primal fear washed over Liam. To have fought so hard, to have come so close, only to lose his friend to the simple, brutal calculus of the food chain, was a cruelty he could not bear. This was his all-in moment. The roles were about to be reversed. For the past day, he had been the student, the assistant, his strength and service to her knowledge. Now, he had to become the guardian. He moved with a quiet, deadly efficiency. He did not waste time with words. He simply picked up his rifle, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hands. He checked the load, his movements economical and sure. He then positioned himself, placing his own body squarely between the mountain lion on the ridge and the two souls he was now sworn to protect, the horse who was his past, and the woman who was becoming his unexpected future. He did not raise the rifle to fire, not yet. A warning shot would only confirm the horse's weakness and might provoke an attack. Instead, he simply stood there, a silent, unmovable sentinel, his presence a clear, undeniable challenge to the predator. He was a man who had fled from conflict, who had sought only peace. But now, with everything he had just rediscovered on the line, he would not back down. He would stand his ground. He was no longer just a grieving widower. He was a protector. And he would meet the wildness of the mountain with a fierce, unwavering wildness of his own. The standoff had begun. The sun rose higher, painting the canyon walls in hues of gold and rose, but the cold tension in the arroyo did not break. For what felt like an eternity, the standoff continued. The mountain lion on the ridge remained perfectly still, a statue of patient, deadly intent. And Liam, on the creek bed below, did not waver, his rifle held ready, his gaze locked on the predator. Beside him, Tala had begun a low, rhythmic chant, a prayer to the spirits of the mountain, asking not for victory, but for respect, for a peaceful resolution. The mountain lion was a creature of calculated risk. It had come seeking an easy meal, a weak and dying prey. What it found instead was a defiant, unmoving man armed with fire stick, and a woman whose strange, powerful voice seemed to speak to the very stones around them. The odds had changed. The hunt was no longer easy. With a final, dismissive flick of its long tail, the great cat turned and melted back into the rocks, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. A collective, shuddering breath of relief escaped both Liam and Tala. The final threat had passed. They had won, not through violence, but through a shared, unwavering resolve. They had faced the serpent and the lion, the poison of the earth and the hunger of the wild, and together, they had protected the life that was so precious to them both.
No, please.
In the quiet aftermath, they looked at each other. A new, unbreakable bond forged between them, a bond of shared battle and mutual respect. 3 weeks later, the memory of the arroyo felt like a distant, feverish dream. Spirit, the magnificent stallion, was fully recovered. The strange, wild medicine of the Apache healer, combined with the slow, gentle medicine of time, had worked its magic. He now galloped across the high meadow of Liam's ranch, his coat gleaming in the sun, his strength and spirit completely restored. The last shadow of Elena's loss had been lifted, replaced by the vibrant, living presence of her final, beautiful gift. But Spirit was not the only one who had been healed. Liam's own heart, a place long locked in a winter of grief, had begun to thaw. The silence of his ranch was no longer empty. It was filled with a new, quiet sense of purpose. He found Tala not in the wilderness, but in a small, secluded camp she had made by the creek on his land, a place where the healing herbs were plentiful. She had stayed, not out of obligation, but out of a shared, unspoken understanding. He came to her not as a debtor, but as a friend. He did not bring money, a payment she would have refused. He brought an offering, a small, carefully crafted wooden box, made from the wood of a lightning-struck pine. She opened it. Inside was not gold or jewels, but a collection of seeds, tiny, dark, and full of promise. They were my wife's. She loved flowers. She always said this valley needed more color. I never knew how to plant them. I was wondering if you might. It was a simple question, but it was an offer of a shared future. He was not just offering her seeds to plant. He was offering her a place to put down roots. He, the man of maps and fences, was asking the woman of the earth to help him build a garden. Tala looked from the seeds in the box to the quiet, hopeful face of the man before her. She saw the man who had wept for his horse. The man who had, against all his ingrained beliefs, trusted her. The man who had stood, armed and unwavering, between her and the wild. She saw a man whose grief, like her own, had not broken him, but had carved a space in his heart for a deeper, more profound compassion. She gave him a small, genuine smile, a smile that reached her dark, wise eyes, and it was a more beautiful sight than any sunrise he had ever seen. We will need good soil, and plenty of water. It was a yes to the garden, a yes to the future, a yes to a new life born from the brink of death. In the heart of the Wild West, two solitary healers, one of the body and one of the soul, had finally found in each other the one remedy they could not find alone. A reason to begin again. If this story of healing and trust moved your heart, click the video on your screen now for another unforgettable tale from the Wild West. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us what part of the story you loved most in the comments below. Your support helps our stories grow.